3 days after they vanished, the forest gave them back. Morning hung low over Rock Island Campground, its light thin, the air heavy with still water and silence. A white GMC Sierra stood parked at the edge of the clearing, half sunk in mud, its windows dim with condensation. Nothing moved inside. A ranger, passing for the second time that week, paused. He noticed the door, unlatched. The smell, faint, chemical. He called out once. The forest did not answer. Behind the truck, near the slope that met the river, the ground darkened with damp soil. 3 small forms lay close together. The mist caught on plastic. A single shoe rested on its side. The rest was still. By the time deputies arrived, the light had flattened to gray. They marked the ground, traced the footprints, and waited for names that would come later. Peyton, 9. Evelyn, 8. Olivia, 5. Their father, Travis Caleb Decker, was nowhere. His wallet sat on the passenger seat, blood pressed faintly into the fold. The silence that morning was not emptiness. It was what remained. By mid-morning, the temperature had climbed a few degrees. The mist was thinning, the sun finding its way through the tree line. Technicians moved slowly, their boots sinking into the damp ground, careful not to disturb the patterns that had already formed. The scene was quiet, except for the muddled clicks of cameras and the low voices of deputies marking evidence. The truck sat where it had stopped, engine cold, keys still in the ignition. Its white surface carried faint streaks of brown from the rain that had passed overnight. Inside, the seats were pushed forward, the dashboard littered with paper, crumbs, and a child's empty juice pouch. A folded jacket lay across the passenger seat. Beneath it, investigators found a wallet, a driver's license, and a set of military dog tags engraved with the name Travis Caleb Decker. They opened the tailgate carefully. A single bloody handprint marked the metal, darkened now, almost dry. Nearby, impressions in the soil indicated movement, small feet, one after another, leading toward the slope and then stopping. There were no adult footprints beside them. The girls had been bound, nylon zip ties around their wrists, drawn tight but not chaotic. Their placement suggested control, not struggle. Each child had a plastic covering pulled over her head, the edges knotted at the neck. Forensic teams would later determine that death came quickly, by asphyxiation. The bindings were not improvised, they were purchased, packaged, uniform. A ranger placed an orange marker beside each body. The color looked unnatural against the earth. He stepped back, wrote the coordinates, and said nothing. Detectives arrived from Wenatchee before noon. They began by tracing what little routine was known. The night before the disappearance, the children's mother, Kayla Decker, had dropped them off at their father's small apartment in Wenatchee. It was part of a routine custody schedule, weekends alternating. She would later tell police that he seemed calm, polite as always, no sign of agitation. She had spoken to the girls around 8 that night, a brief call about pajamas and bedtime. After that, the line went quiet. At first, she assumed they had fallen asleep. Then, by 10, she began to call again. No answer. By midnight, she reported them missing. Officers were dispatched to Travis Decker's address early the next morning. The apartment was empty, his bed unmade, clothing still hanging in the closet, the refrigerator half-stocked. Neighbors told investigators that his white GMC Sierra was gone before sunrise. No one saw the children. What began as a custody dispute soon turned into a statewide search. Decker's background complicated everything. A former soldier, trained in survival and reconnaissance, familiar with rural terrain and long stretches off-grid. His military record painted him as skilled, self-reliant, disciplined, qualities that now made him nearly impossible to find. At the Chelan County Sheriff's Office, maps were spread across tables. Circles, drawn in red ink, marked campgrounds, trailheads, and service roads. Deputies combed nearby forests, checking cabins and fishing sites. Helicopters scanned the riverbanks for signs of movement or shelter. The truck would not be found until 3 days later, abandoned, half hidden between trees, a few miles from the main road. Inside the cab, investigators found traces of blood on the floor mat, faint but visible beneath the sunlight that filtered through the windshield. A child's small hair clip rested near the gear shift. DNA samples would later confirm it belonged to Evelyn. Forensics estimated the time of death within 48 hours of their disappearance. The decomposition consistent with exposure to cold and moisture. There were no signs of struggle inside the truck, no fingerprints other than Decker's and the children's. The conclusion was quiet, methodical, and devastating. He had prepared for this. When the coroner's van arrived, the site grew still again. Deputies lowered their voices. The ranger who had first called it in stood back near the waterline, arms folded, watching as the bodies were covered and lifted. The Sierra was towed before dusk. Its tires left deep, perfect ruts in the soil that slowly filled with rainwater overnight. By evening, the campground was empty. The tape fluttered in the wind, caught against the branches, then settled. The investigation now had a beginning. A scene, a vehicle, 3 children, and the single name that connected them all. The rest of the story, why he did it, where he went, and how it ended, was still waiting in the quiet of the hills. The manhunt began before dawn. Across Chelan County, deputies were already checking gas stations, motels, and rest stops along the Columbia River corridor. His name, Travis Caleb Decker, had gone out to every jurisdiction in the state. The description was clear: 6'2", athletic build, former Army infantryman, trained in survival. Considered dangerous, possibly armed. News of the discovery spread before investigators were ready to speak. By noon, reporters were stationed outside the sheriff's office. They waited for statements that didn't come. Inside, officers moved quietly between rooms, heads down, radios low. They were still trying to understand the sequence of hours that had led from an ordinary visitation to 3 deaths in the woods. Digital forensics took priority. Agents obtained access to Decker's phone records, email, and Google activity. In the days before the murders, he had searched phrases like "how to move to Canada," "survival in wilderness," and "border crossing near British Columbia." His search history suggested planning, but not direction, an escape imagined, not yet carried out. A laptop recovered from his apartment contained downloaded maps of state forests, trails near Leavenworth, and notes referencing fuel consumption and camping gear. Investigators interpreted it as a sign of deliberate withdrawal, not panic, but a chosen isolation. Decker's military record complicated everything. He had served in Afghanistan, stationed with the 503rd Infantry Regiment, later reassigned to the 173rd Airborne in Italy. Former colleagues described him as skilled but unstable, disciplined one week, withdrawn the next. He had failed to complete Ranger School and was removed from the elite unit after a breakdown during training. Those who had served with him mentioned the same pattern: long silences, impulsive anger, quick disappearances. After his discharge in 2021, he never found stable work. His marriage dissolved quietly 2 years later. By 2024, he was living out of his truck, alternating between campgrounds and short-term motels. At first, his ex-wife defended him. In interviews, she described him as an active dad, someone who showed up, who kept promises. But that description soon collided with reality: the search photos, the timeline, the blood analysis. Investigators traced his last confirmed movement to a gas station camera near Wenatchee, recorded the evening of May 30th at 8:47 p.m. He was alone. The children were not seen. He bought a bottle of water, a pack of cable ties, and a roll of plastic sheeting. His demeanor was calm. He paid in cash, thanked the clerk, and walked out. From there, his route vanished. For weeks, the search moved outward. Drones over forest canopies, patrols through logging roads, night surveillance on riverbanks. Each day narrowed possibilities without bringing answers. A deputy marshal remarked later that Decker seemed to have folded himself into the terrain. His training made him both predictable and invisible. He knew how to erase a footprint, how to read the sky, how to stay alive without contact. In early June, a tip came from a family camping near Entiat. They reported a man resembling Decker collecting water from a stream, carrying a military-style backpack. A search team arrived within hours, but by then he was gone. Only a small fire pit remained, surrounded by empty cans and a burned patch of ground. DNA testing confirmed the ashes contained traces of his blood. It suggested injury, perhaps from the same night he abandoned the truck. The forensics unit noted dried blood along the truck's tailgate, consistent with a laceration on his right hand. But there were no signs of medical treatment, no hospital records, no pharmacy visits. He had vanished fully. As days turned into weeks, public pressure grew. Why wasn't there an Amber Alert sooner? Why hadn't the system recognized danger earlier? The Washington State Patrol defended its decision, claiming the criteria for an alert weren't met when the children were first reported missing. It became a point of national scrutiny. The phrase "system failure" appeared across headlines. Meanwhile, the search command shifted its focus north, toward the Canadian border. Agents coordinated with the RCMP, circulating his photo at checkpoints. But Decker's bank accounts remained untouched. His phone was powered off permanently after the night of May 30th. By July, sightings began to blur into rumor. Hikers, hunters, travelers who thought they saw him but couldn't be certain. One call led a team deep into Idaho's Sawtooth National Forest, where they searched a week before confirming it was a false lead. The man seen was another traveler, same build, different story. Still, the search continued. The forest was wide, the summer dry and long. Deputies spoke less to the press, their updates reduced to single lines. Nothing new today. In late August, a set of bones was found near a service road in Chelan County. They were small, brittle, bleached by the sun. Hope flickered that the search might finally end, but forensic tests later confirmed they belonged to an animal. Another dead path in a widening maze. Still, the search continued. The forest was wide, the summer dry and long. Deputies spoke less to the press, their updates reduced to single lines. Nothing new today. In late August, a set of bones was found near a service road in Chelan County. They were small, brittle, bleached by the sun. Hope flickered that the search might finally end, but forensic tests later confirmed they belonged to an animal. Another dead path in a widening maze. The quiet grew heavier. By September, the search had lasted more than 3 months. Equipment was withdrawn, budgets strained. The name Travis Decker shifted from wanted suspect to missing person. Then, on the morning of September 18th, a hiker reported what looked like human remains on a hillside south of Leavenworth. The body was partially concealed under branches scattered by animals and rain. Near it, a torn jacket and a rusted knife. DNA would later confirm what they already suspected. The man they had been chasing was already dead. But at that moment, on that ridge above the valley, the discovery meant only one thing: the search was over. The questions, however, were not. No one could tell how long he had been there or how he had died. The coroner would later say the decomposition made certainty impossible. There was no note, no weapon found close enough to prove suicide. Just fragments, bone, cloth, and silence. When the report was filed, it ended on a single line: remains consistent with Travis Caleb Decker, cause of death undetermined. It closed the search, but it didn't close the story. Before the manhunt, before the search grids and press conferences, there had been years of slow collapse. The file built on Decker's past revealed it plainly, not as a sudden break, but as a gradual thinning of his stability until nothing held. Travis Caleb Decker was born in Pewaukee, Wisconsin, in 1992. The early records showed a predictable arc: football, wrestling, honor roll, military recruitment. Coaches described him as competitive, disciplined, occasionally volatile. He enlisted in the U.S. Army at 20, joining the National Guard before entering active duty. He served in Afghanistan in 2014. 4 months, limited combat, but the effects lasted. His fellow soldiers told investigators that after returning home, he was quiet and controlled, then easily angered without warning. He began isolating, withdrawing into long silences. Military psychiatrists diagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder. Later, borderline personality disorder was added. He received treatment for a year, then stopped showing up to appointments. When he left the Army in 2021, his record was clean but marked by instability. The structured life had ended. Civilian life didn't hold. He moved between jobs: warehouse, construction, security. None for more than a few months. The marriage that had lasted 10 years began to fracture. His wife filed for divorce in 2023. Friends said he never spoke ill of her, never raised his voice, but carried a constant exhaustion. After the separation, his living arrangements changed weekly: motels, vehicles, campgrounds. He told people he preferred the quiet. He told no one what was unraveling. The court granted shared custody, standard visitation. There were no warnings in the record, no restraining orders, no previous violence. His ex-wife's attorney described him as cooperative. A judge saw no reason to restrict access. But in the months leading to the murders, subtle signs appeared, dismissed as fatigue, financial stress, or transition. He stopped maintaining steady contact, missed therapy, sold his last remaining personal belongings, tools, furniture, his television, all for cash. When questioned by a friend, he said he was cutting down. Investigators later pieced together fragments of those final days. Purchases were minimal: plastic bags, nylon ties, duct tape, food rations. There was no written note, no message, no single moment that revealed a plan, but the absence of randomness made it clear this was prepared. Psychiatrists who reviewed the file afterward suggested a form of psychological splitting, The moment where a parent who feels trapped perceives destruction as escape. In such cases, control replaces empathy. The act becomes not rage but ritual, a way to erase the unbearable self. Decker's military background amplified that control. Every decision was procedural, materials chosen for efficiency, timing aligned with isolation. There was no evidence of impulsive violence. The pattern was deliberate. His search history before May 30th showed curiosity about border relocation, but also isolationism, off-grid living, wilderness survival, ways to disappear without trace. The contradiction ran through his behavior, one part trying to flee, another preparing for finality. What investigators couldn't determine was when that line crossed, when intent shifted from escape to annihilation. In psychological terms, it may not have been distinct. For some individuals with severe borderline features, the self becomes fragmented, oscillating between idealization and destruction. Once the center collapses, relationships, identity, even love become perceived threats. The children, in that framework, represented the last connection to a world he no longer believed he could inhabit. To the mind unraveling, their existence might have symbolized what he couldn't repair. He had told a neighbor a few weeks earlier that he wasn't sure how to start over. The neighbor described the comment as quiet, almost reflective, not alarming, not confessional. He told another acquaintance that he'd been through worse, smiling faintly before walking away. The warning signs were invisible because they were contained. His deterioration was silent, inward, and masked by routine politeness. When the acts occurred, the bindings, the suffocation, the disposal, there were no visible signs of frenzy. Each motion carried structure. Investigators later compared it to a soldier following orders. What happens in such moments remains inaccessible. The logic of survival twists inward. The discipline that once protected becomes the weapon itself. In the Army, Decker had been trained to act under pressure, to detach, to minimize emotion. It made him efficient in chaos. That same detachment, turned inward, may have numbed the final threshold. After the killings, his movements were erratic but purposeful. He stayed near rivers, campgrounds, and forest roads. The truck's position suggested he intended to leave it, not as concealment but as abandonment. The blood on the tailgate implied an injury, possibly self-inflicted. When his remains were found months later, the absence of a weapon complicated interpretation. Some theorized suicide by exposure, starvation, dehydration, or deliberate stillness. Others suggested disorientation, exhaustion, an end that arrived by surrender rather than decision. None of it could be proven. What remained was the psychological footprint, a man who had once been structured by discipline, unmade by isolation. A soldier turned fugitive, a father turned destroyer, an identity collapsing beneath its own contradictions. There were no diary entries, no recordings, no apology, only the record of actions, precise, controlled, and final. In the end, what defined him wasn't violence, but silence, the kind that expands outward from a single moment in a truck near the river to an entire community searching for meaning in what no one could hear coming. When the confirmation came, it arrived quietly, a DNA match, a press release, a single paragraph declaring that the remains found near Leavenworth were those of Travis Caleb Decker. The U.S. Marshal Service marked the case closed. The search logs ended mid-page. There was no press conference, only a written statement, no words about motive, no speculation about the final hours, The report listed the findings plainly: remains consistent, cause undetermined. In Wenatchee, a memorial for the girls took place 2 weeks later. 3 white chairs were placed on the church stage, each with a framed photograph: Peyton with her science fair ribbon, Evelyn in a school play costume, Olivia holding a stuffed bear. The mother sat in silence throughout, her hands folded tightly. Local reporters attended but did not film. The pastor spoke briefly about stillness, forgiveness, and the weight of unanswered questions. Outside, the air was cool. Wind moved through the flags in front of the church, snapping once, then quieting again. People stood in small groups, talking softly about nothing at all. Across Washington, editorials appeared for a few days. Some questioned how the system failed to see the warning signs. Others debated whether mental health monitoring for veterans had improved. The story faded quickly. The news cycle moved on. For the investigators who had spent months searching, closure felt incomplete. There was no trial, no confession, no definitive line between intention and collapse. The files were archived under solved homicide, a classification that said nothing about meaning. The coroner's report noted decomposition too advanced for autopsy. No bullet wounds, no blunt trauma. The likelihood of exposure was high. He may have wandered until he stopped. He may have chosen that place. The phrasing remained neutral. Months later, a deputy revisited the original site near Rock Island Campground. The ground had changed. Grass had grown over the markers. Rain had washed the soil smooth. The clearing looked ordinary again, the way it must have before the truck was found. He stood there for a while, listening. The river moved with the same rhythm it always had, steady, indifferent, continuous. The sound filled the air where words no longer reached. In Pewaukee, Wisconsin, a small local newspaper ran a final piece. A single column titled "Pewaukee Native Found Dead After Manhunt." It mentioned his high school football record, his service years, his mental health diagnosis, and ended with the words, "survived by his family." It did not name the children. There were no legal reforms, no immediate policy changes, just a brief tightening of visitation protocols in Chelan County, a procedural adjustment buried in administrative language. The people closest to the case rarely spoke about it afterward. The sheriff retired the following spring. The ranger who found the truck transferred districts. For them, it became a memory attached to landscape, a truck in mist, a sound in the trees, a file that never truly ends. What remained were the records, precise, clinical, complete. They told everything that could be proven and nothing that could be understood. In the end, the Decker case became less a story of pursuit and more an outline of absence, a father unmade by the silence he created, 3 lives folded into it, and a forest that returned to quiet as if nothing had ever happened. The file sits now in storage, its spine labeled, its photographs sealed. There will be no new evidence, no new revelation, only the weight of what is known and the stillness that follows it. And somewhere beyond that, in the space between memory and forgetting, the sound of the river continues, moving through the same valley, beneath the same sky, indifferent to all of it.